You know what? We already have enough people, so let's start. Whoever is late, it's their loss. So, the topic will be forks in depth. This is the first Bitcoin Cash meetup, so welcome. This QR code would lead to a copy of this presentation where you can see other screens if you want to go back, or if you just want to keep the presentation to view it later. Of course, you can also look at the recording and take the code from there. This is the Slido link. The password is forks in depth, but you can again see the QR code. This is a place where you can ask questions, especially if you're online, because this is being streamed. Some people might be watching online right now. I need to open it myself as well in order to see the questions being asked. Okay. And it's a platform where questions can be voted, which means that the questions with higher rank will get answered first. Huh. Didn't find it. Okay. The link didn't work for me. Okay, I'm there. Next. This is some information about me. You can use, again, a QR code to see my blog, where I don't really write that much. But it's also a portal to see the videos that I record. I'm a programmer and a Bitcoin Cash fanboy. Email, phone, blog, GitHub, and Facebook. Feel free to use any. Now, before we start, I have promised to make a few photos, and also while I make the photos, I want you to download a Bitcoin Cash wallet. Good wallets are Yenum, HandCash, and bitcoin.com wallet, but if you are not technical, I recommend Yenum or HandCash. Bitcoin.com is for slightly more technical people. Well, actually, I guess you won't have a problem with that. By the way, good news. I have recently translated the HandCash wallet in Bulgarian, and soon it will be coming. Soon it will be released. Oops, I guess I did the wrong thing here. Just a second. Short video to show how many people there are, so that I can receive the rest of the money from the Bitcoin Cash Fund. And did you download wallets? So I'll need a volunteer because I don't want to go through all of you and give you money. Okay. Since you're 11 people, I'll be giving you $25. So since you volunteered, 3 for you, plus the 1 for you, and everyone else gets 2. Your wallet? Actually, there is another option. If you wish, I can give you less money now, but on the next meetup, I can give you a hat. I found a cheap way to order hats with logos. Your choice. What? What? Take cash. Okay, of course, cash. So, give me your address. Oh, this thing. Sure, just a second. Yes?
That's your advice, but is there some other wallets?
There are more than 10 that I know of, but
All of them are Bitcoin Cash capable.
no, not all. there are two types of Bitcoin, and some of them are capable of both, using both. Some are capable of only one. And if you hold to a wallet of one type of Bitcoin and receive the other type, you might lose the funds. Yeah, basically the people started arguing. HandCash is only for Bitcoin Cash. It doesn't know normal Bitcoin. Yes. So
I already have money. Is it okay?
you just sent $2 to everybody. I'm sending you 25, so you have a bit extra for fees and for yourself. Just a second. Click. So you should be receiving it any moment.
Yes, 25.
Okay. So go around the people and send each a $2. Yenum, yes. Yenum is a cool wallet that's intended for complete newbies. The idea is they don't bother people with stuff like addresses, stuff like backup phrases. It's much less secure. It's actually very unsecure, but at the same time it is so simple that even your grandma can use it. Okay, and next I want to do a short survey about these questions. So, have you ever held Bitcoin Cash? Who here hasn't? Okay, you will soon. You will soon. And of course, have you ever spent Bitcoin Cash? Who has ever actually used it for something useful? I'm also lefty in hand. Cool. We should change that soon as well. Next question. Were you in crypto before August the 1st of last year? Yeah, question or just yes? Okay. This is the birthday of Bitcoin Cash. And I actually, I guess not exactly, but the point is, this is a very important day for Bitcoin Cash because it was the day of a lot of argument. I'm not sure what you mean there. We have many, as far as I know, there are over 40. It's one of the only two that actually matter. No, there are only two that actually matter. There are more than 40 others, but there are only two that actually have any significance anywhere. And last question, how many of you are programmers? I'm also lifting a hand. Okay, so. It counts. What's that? Okay, these are the topics that we'll discuss today. What is a fork? How can forks split the chain? What types of forks do we have? What are the risks of hard forks, the risks of soft forks, and how to hard fork without a split? Also, when do we do a soft fork? There has been a lot of misuse of soft forks, but that doesn't mean soft forks are bad. There is just a time and place to use them. Okay, first, what is a fork? Before I explain that, these are the types of forks that we will not talk about. We are not going to talk about what a code fork is, because I'm pretty sure that most of you already know that. When a project is split and driven into a different direction, it's a standard procedure in open source software. We're not going to talk about natural forks, which happen when two miners discover a block at the same time and announce it to the network. It it's a pretty complex topic, and it would take at least half an hour to explain it properly. We're also not going to talk about bug forks. Bug forks are when a software has a mistake, a different node implementation has a mistake, and for that reason the chains split. Usually it gets fixed pretty quickly, but it can lead to some double spans. And also, forks rewriting the past is basically when the whole network just agrees to go to a checkpoint backwards in time, to block -100, for example. Now, basics of open source splits, which I guess is the thing I wrote that we're not going to talk about, but I included a slide anyway. This is from Wikipedia. To split the source code into different development directions, forking leads to the development of different versions of a program. And what we're going to talk about is what is forked, how is forked, and who is forking it. Because all these three things decide what's going to happen to the network when we're talking about blockchains. Welcome. Even more people. We're 13 now. Okay. So, when we have an intentional fork, now, before I explain about intentional forks, it's important to understand that a blockchain is simply the longest valid chain, and the reason there are forks is because people disagree about what is valid. It's usually easy to understand what is longest if they're using the same algorithm for mining, but valid is a completely different thing, and people argue about that a lot. On this picture you'll see the basics, but I'm pretty sure you've seen such pictures before. So we can have accidental and intentional forks. Accidental is what I explained before, when a bug is introduced in one of the node implementations and makes it different from the others. Yeah, of course. I gave you a bit extra, but now okay. Give them 150 because they're late. So intentional blockchain forks happen when people are running incompatible nodes of the same program. They agree on what mining is, they agree on what the protocol of sending data is. They just don't agree on what is valid. And when there is such a disagreement, they simply start adding more blocks onto their own chain. So far this is simple. I'm just starting with simple stuff in order to dig deeper. So we can fork the protocol. If we change anything other than the protocol, it usually doesn't lead to the fork. We can change implementations of wallets, implementations of other protocols that build on top. If, for example, the Lightning Network implementation gets changed, that would not change the Bitcoin protocol at all. But these are the four things that could potentially lead to a blockchain split. The first two are very unlikely to lead to a blockchain split, but it is possible. The second two are almost certain to lead to a blockchain split, but it is possible to not have a split. And I'll start with the first one, communication rules. The communication rules in a blockchain node are the rules that explain how do nodes find each other, how do nodes transfer information. So far, it is common to use internet, but other implementations do it differently. The Bitcoin implementation, for example, is written on Node.js, and it uses WebSockets, which is still over the internet, but it's a different protocol. Even so, they're fully compatible with the main chain. It's just that the information goes through different routes. Technically, it's even possible to do it over SMS. And your bill would be quite big, but still, it would work. When we talk about data storage rules, it is important to know that it can potentially lead to a fork if some of the data is not stored correctly or is not stored at all. Because communication between nodes often depends on some prior knowledge or some knowledge about the current state of the blockchain. And if anything related to that is different, it is possible for nodes to split. However, this would mostly fit in the bug fork, not so much in an intentional fork. It's also possible to do it intentionally, but I don't think anybody would do that in such a way. Still, making such changes would usually not lead to a fork, even if it's a change in the protocol. Now, here are the interesting parts. We can change the rules about what makes a block valid. And this has been done before. This is the change that we had in increasing the block size. This is the change that the ABC developers are proposing right now to change the ordering of transactions inside the block. This would change the validity of the previous blocks. They would no longer be valid. But at the same time, it would, what's the word? At the same time, it would introduce something that might be not valid in the legacy version. Almost always when you change something about the block validation, you split. It could be a soft or hard fork, but there is some sort of forking of the network. And as you'll see later, soft forks also do a split. It's just not as obvious. And we also have transaction validation rules, which describe when a transaction is valid or invalid. These are complicated rules, and I believe they're for the best to leave them untouched. The first example, BIP 16, Bitcoin Improvement Proposal 16, is the script hash. That was the abbreviation. This allows people to not have to enter the script of the receiver. Instead, they just use the hash, and the receiver has the responsibility to enter the script and withdraw the money. It is used for some sort of contract. Segwit, of course, is a change in what a transaction is, and therefore which transaction is valid. It removed the signatures from the main transaction, from the main script, and placed them outside in the witness block. I'm not sure if it's correct to call it block, but in the witness area. And our fork in May 15th of this year, when some old disabled opcodes were re-enabled, was also a change in the validation rules of transactions. This type of forks are guaranteed to lead to a split. It doesn't have to be a split of the network, but the blockchain is split. So, we have hard forks and soft forks. Most people have a misconception about what these words mean. By definition, and these definitions that I'm telling you are taken from the Bitcoin wiki, which is, I have no idea actually who's holding that, but it's the Bitcoin core wiki. So, hard fork is when the introduced changes make the rules of the current chain less strict. That means, for example, if we change the block size from 1 to 8, as we did, that is a hard fork. It is not hard because it causes a split. It is not hard because everyone has to update their node. It is hard because it makes the rules less restrictive. Something that was not valid before is valid now. We also have soft forks which are the opposite. And here I have given a theoretical example, which I believe is not going to happen ever. If the block size gets reduced from 1 to half a megabyte. If that happens, then something that was valid before is still valid. Having half a megabyte block was valid before, and after such a change, it would still be valid. Of course, if anyone mines the old version of the block, he would simply get rejected by the current network. And if not enough of the current network accepts that change, then there will be a split. So here I have painted an illustration about how this soft forking thing works. The miner explains that he's going to make the change of 1 megabyte to half a megabyte, while the user explains that he accepts everything that is smaller than 1 megabyte. And I don't think I need to explain that word by word. I think it's pretty obvious. Basically, it is valid. So next we have active and passive forks. I have not found any information on this, so I had to invent words. Nobody calls it like that yet, but since hard fork is not always active and soft fork is not always passive, I decided to separate these two. Active fork is when the entire network is required to update their nodes, is required to change their software completely. While passive forks are forks that I also like to call permissionless. When somebody changes part of the software and still maintains a valid connection to the others. An example of a passive fork that I gave, that's not written here, that I gave before the meeting, was Bitcoin Improvement Proposal 42, when the limited supply was introduced. Now, active forks, for example, is the Ethereum Classic hard fork. When Ethereum Classic separated from Ethereum, that had to be active. They had to reject the rules introduced by Ethereum. Both sides had to be active. And of course, our Bitcoin Cash hard fork. Segwit and replaced by fee, which is Bitcoin Improvement Proposal 125, were soft forks. And that is quite normal because recently the core developers of Bitcoin have been pretty, how do I say that? Have been using soft forks quite a lot. I believe that's wrong, and I'll explain later. So, if any fork can be activated by miners and users. Miners can do active hard forks or passive soft forks. But when users do it, it's the opposite. Users do passive hard forks and active soft forks. That I'll explain a bit later with examples. But for now I want to explain that when I say users, I don't mean all of you, except if some of you have businesses or exchanges. I mean exactly that, businesses and exchanges. They are the users I'm speaking of. Individual users can do whatever they want at home and it would rarely matter. But if, for example, Coinbase or blockchain.info or any other big provider decides to switch their protocol version, that will be a big change, and that might lead to some important consequences. And again, another important thing to mention is users are never enough to do a proper change. There always has to be some miners. However, it is important to know that there have to be enough miners, not a majority of them. That's exactly how the Bitcoin Cash fork survived. We had enough miners, even if there weren't a majority. click. So in this table, we see hard forks and soft forks, miner activated, user activated, with examples. So if a miner activates a hard fork, it's always active, and the example of that is 1 megabyte to 8 megabyte blocks. This is how we split from the BTC. User, now I'll go with miner activated soft forks. Miner activated soft forks with tighter rules is SegWit. Now it is a bit strange that SegWit, which introduces new features, is actually a soft fork, because soft forks are supposed to make tighter rules, not more options. SegWit is a new feature, but even so, it's a soft fork. So I'll explain how that works a bit later. But for now, know that when miners introduce restrictive rules, it's a passive fork. It's a permissionless fork. It doesn't involve your acceptance. User-activated forks. First, I will talk about the soft forks. User-activated soft fork is an active fork. And the example of that is Bitcoin Improvement Proposal 148. This is what was happening right before Bitcoin Cash was created. A bunch of users threatened that they will run a fully SegWit version of the node if miners don't accept it by a specific date. And that threat worked. Miners accepted it. The idea was that if enough users accept this change, then they would move the money, they would move the value to their own splitted version of the chain. Some people don't believe that this will ever work. I actually believe it can work, but there has to be more consensus to do it. Back then there weren't enough consensus and it would have probably failed. Then what happens if users do a hard fork? The answer is pretty much nothing. Hard forks introduce new rules, and as long as miners don't accept these new rules, you can run a node which has unlimited block size, but that just means that you accept blocks with unlimited block size. Doesn't mean that the miners will pass them to you. I like to say that if miner-activated soft forks are backwards compatible, then user-activated hard forks are future compatible. It is possible to run them and then therefore make future hard forks of the miners easier. If some users already accept the new version of the protocol, then the miners will have less trouble accepting it as well. And this is exactly what I just said. Explains about backwards and forwards compatible stuff. So what exactly are the risks of miner-activated soft forks? If they're done properly and in the right time, actually there are no risks. The problem is they're not done in the right way. They're usually used to introduce new features because the developers are afraid of community splits. And as I explained, soft forks are supposed to be about removing stuff, not adding more stuff. The way they usually do it is that they have blank opcodes in the transaction script, and for non-transaction stuff they have different tricks. The blank opcode scripts opcode. The blank opcodes in the script are basically just functions that have return true. So obviously nobody is using them because that would mean the money would be takeable by anyone. And they simply restrict what that function does, and in this way pass it as a soft fork, even if it's a completely new opcode that never existed before. It's cheating. And it's also risky. I'll explain why it's risky now. Hard forks can make the new version incompatible by design. That means nobody running the old version would be able to do anything on the new one. Soft forks are not like that. They're much harder to design because you have because the new version is also compatible with the old one, and any possible thing in the old version will have a possible representation in the new one. The developers have to find ways to test everything that was possible before with everything that's possible now, and figure out if there is some unforeseen behavior. I'll give you an example, which is a fear many people had about SegWit. They found a way around it, but that doesn't mean SegWit is perfect. People were afraid that if SegWit was are more restrictive rules over something that before you worked as return true, then everybody running a legacy node would see the current script as anybody can spend. Here you go, free money. They went around that by making it work like nobody can spend that script in the legacy version, but in the SegWit version, people with the correct hash can spend it. This was a smart way to avoid the problem. They avoided it basically by returning 2 variables at the end of the script instead of 1, which makes it invalid. But at the same time, it's a hack, and it's also just one of the common ways to use a script. If somebody constructs a new type of script, he has to test it not only with the standard scripting, but also with SegWit. And any new additions would be harder. Did I miss anything? Yeah, software testing is never 100% sure, and feel free to put your life savings into the hands of the tester who tested that script. Not in his hands, but in the hands of the one who finds the vulnerability. So, if an exploit is found, which means somebody figures out how to abuse a new type of transaction that didn't exist in the legacy version, using the legacy version, then only the miners can save you. What does that mean? Miners can accept standard and non-standard transactions, and most nodes are configured to prioritize the standard ones. So your only hope, if your life savings are in a vulnerable script, is that the miners would not mine a block with that transaction. The problem is that then you have to trust that the miners will not do it, and this is supposed to be a trustless system. Here we're getting to more complicated stuff already. I'm explaining the exactly same thing I spoke just now, but in a chart, in a graph. So we have some inputs. Now, first I wanted to do this with SegWit transaction, but I couldn't find any obvious vulnerability in SegWit, even if I considered that the legacy nodes would somehow take priority. So I just wrote it about any type of transaction. And I see that I forgot to remove SegWit from there. It's not about SegWit. So we have somebody's input that goes to your output. You can spend that. And you being the attacker can send a transaction to somebody who is running the legacy node. For example, somebody in a shop who's accepting zero confirmation transactions. Then, since you know that the miners already accepted to run a different version, that legacy transaction will not get into a block. And even if some miners mine it, the other version will have more blocks. The other version will have more hash power. And they would just mine a longer chain, and that transaction will get rejected. And since it's not compatible with the new version, the new miners would not mine it ever. That means that zero confirmation transactions are basically completely unsecure if soft forks are involved. Hello. So instead, what you do is you mine. No, you don't mine. Sorry, you send to the miners a new transaction that spends the same output, but giving it to your address. And now it's a problem of which miners have priority. If the legacy miners have priority, then I guess I'm reading it wrongly. Okay, I'm sorry. This was supposed to be about you being hacked and not you being the hacker. Doesn't really matter. Did anyone not get the idea? Okay, I'll continue. I'll skip that. This is unlikely, but it's possible. The legacy miners can, in theory, just come back. People can just run the old version of the software, which is still compatible, and mine with it. This is part of the protocol, actually. And since mining is permissionless, there is nothing we can do about it. As long as there are two versions that are compatible, one can always just come back. So Segwit is safe for now. They have tested it a lot. There are a lot of people who are looking at it and verifying that there are no ways to cheat. However, people aren't perfect, and as long as there are two versions that are compatible, one of which says that you cannot withdraw your money. I first believe that everybody can withdraw. One of them says you cannot withdraw. If there is a reversal of what version gets mined, then you cannot access your funds. I already spoke about how soft forks break the zero confirmation acceptance. This is mostly the reason why currently BTC does not trust zero confirmation. They ruined it, not just by replace by fee, but also by soft forks. Replace by fee actually came later than the previous soft forks, and it was already not trustable. But the thing is, you only have to do one hard fork, and replace by fee is trustable again, because everybody has to do the hard fork in order to use the new chain. I'm sorry, not replaced by fee, zeroconf. Okay, what is... this is about replaced by fee. I should have looked at my slides more. I guess I spoke about something completely different on the first chart. Okay, we can go back to it, but I'm not sure if anybody would want that. Here is about zeroconf, how zeroconf gets loses its credibility because of soft forks. In this chart, you're the hacker. You sent a transaction to a victim which is running the old version. It doesn't get mined, and this is what I was explaining before on a different chart. Sorry, I should have read my charts properly. So I already explained that, so I'm not gonna explain it further. Now, what is the proper way to do a hard fork? How to do a hard fork without as much fear of splitting the chain? First and most important thing is don't do it. If you can get away with not changing anything, it's usually the best. Block size currently has to be changed because we are nowhere near accommodating the whole world. But at the same time, many other changes are unneeded. Now, if you have to do a hard fork, the first rule is to announce it as early as possible. Right now, people are still developing changes for the November hard fork of Bitcoin Cash. This is not professional. This is a decentralized network where where the whole world is a user, and just giving the code in the last month is not an acceptable behavior. I believe the code for the fork should be ready at least a few months before the date. People should have these few months to first do user-activated hard fork. They should just run it without miners running it and experiment in the testnet and basically check if it's properly done. This user-activated hard fork should also be done in the mainnet in order to signalize who is accepting it and who isn't. Every transaction being done can be marked with a memo, just saying, yeah, I accept this stuff. This can be written automatically by the client. And this way, miners can have some statistics about who is accepting the new change and who isn't. If a new change is made in a consensus way and not in a mining war, then this is the proper way to do it. Asking who's accepting it so that they would know which version would have the value, which version would have the money. After all, miners are about their businesses. They're there to earn money, so they care what the users would prefer. And again, when I'm saying user activated, I mean big users. Coinbase, others. Any exchange, any business that does anything to do with currency, they are the important users. Then, as I said, some people can, when I say people, again, users, big exchanges, and so on, can mark their agreement. Then, give time to the developers of wallet, HandCash, Yanum, bitcoin.com wallet, and others. Give them time to do the necessary changes. Right now, they don't have that time, and they must be working overtime, basically, to catch up to all the changes that are being made right now, live, while at the same time these changes are buggy and new changes are being made over them to fix the bugs. And when everybody is ready, that's the moment when you push the consensus fork over. And hard forks, when they're done in such a way, should be about consensus. There can be hard forks without consensus if enough miners agree, but that is usually very destructive. It can be done if there are big disagreements. This is what's going to happen this November, but it's going to bring a lot of problems. Now, when should we use a soft fork? Again, if possible, never. It's best to not have backwards compatible versions ever. But there are times when we have to. And the best answer is to just think about when do we remove features from any other program. We do that when there is a problem. When something is not working properly, when there is a vulnerability, when some hacker figured out how to hack WordPress again and can suddenly spam your forum. That's when you introduce new, that's when you remove features. That's when you restrict what was possible. And that's the only time a soft fork is a viable solution, according to me. Now, who should be doing the soft fork? This is a bit harder question. So far, we have never had an actual soft fork being done by users. But in some cases, the users should be the one doing it. So there are three cases that I thought of. What if the miners are the one abusing the feature that we want to remove? Then, of course, the miners are not going to agree if they're the ones stealing or abusing it in any other way. In that case, user-activated soft fork. And since it would be obvious that the miners are abusing the system, a user-activated soft fork would have pretty good consensus. People are probably gonna have close to 90% agreement. Now, what if hackers are abusing the feature to be removed to somehow cheat the users? Here we have two-sided. So here, both users and miners should do the fork. Miners because users are gonna lose trust in the currency and that would completely screw their business over. Users because they're being robbed. or something else, but probably robbed, because that's the way to exploit the money system. And lastly, what if hackers are abusing the feature in order to steal from the miners and not the users? I could not think of an example of this happening. I mean, the second one is if they find, for example, a weakness in the signatures. If such thing is found, then they would be abusing the transactions. They would be stealing from the transactions, the unconfirmed outputs. However, just theoretically, if they find a way to steal from the miners, for example, I cannot give an example of that, but in that case, I expect a miner-activated soft fork, simply because it's faster. With a user-activated soft fork, you have to speak to the users. You have to have some social presence. With miner-activated soft fork, it could happen over day, and it's more effective. Now, soft forks are about damage control. They should be used to restrict features that are vulnerable and dangerous. The damage is probably already done, and it's just important to stop it, to stop whatever is wrong, to remove whatever is broken. Now, lastly, if users are doing the soft forking, it's important to keep the miners happy. Drastic changes like changing the mining algorithm should be avoided, even if it seems good for the users. Such a thing would break the system. Miners are part of the ecosystem, and we should treat them like contractors. Of course, they treat us like users, so it's a bit complicated, but there's somebody who works and in reward gets money from our system. And I say our system because we're the ones using it. And that's why I like to treat them as contractors. And it's important to remember that we have different incentives. Sometimes we want different things than they do. Now, summary is that it matters what is being forked, who is forking it, and that not all forks split the blockchain. Actually, most of them don't. Usually, if the network is split, if the value is split, that is intentional. Soft forks are not soft. Hard forks can be done better if there is more time. Backwards compatibility is dangerous because it involves a lot of testing and a lot of design over what could have been much simpler. And removing features is only for emergencies. Okay. To get more information, you should read the Bitcoin Improvement Proposals 1 and 2, which explain what a Bitcoin Improvement Proposal is. Then number 99 explains all about forks and splits and different terminology involved in this. They are not going to talk about passive and active, but everything else is there. And in general, you should read all of the BIPs. They're interesting. You could read Mastering Bitcoin and Mastering Bitcoin Cash. I've put a link on Mastering Bitcoin Cash, which is just a fork of the Mastering Bitcoin book by Andreas Antonopoulos. And I think there is more. Yes. Oh, a lot more. I'm not sure you can read that, but some links. First, there is the devs.cash, which lists different Bitcoin Cash projects. And in there you can find stuff that might be useful to you if you're using the currency. There is acceptbitcoin.cash, which is a list of merchants that accept Bitcoin and a map which can help you find ones near you. So far, I don't think there are any in Sofia. Then the Bitcoin Cash Fund, they recently changed to the Bitcoin Association, Bitcoin Cash Association, I mean. They are the people who sponsor events like this, but they also sponsor open source projects. And if you are a programmer or no programmers, you could start a project. As long as it's open source, they can sponsor you, if depending on how helpful it is to the community. If you write a wallet or a library that makes it easier to write other stuff, anything basically, they can give you some cash. Then getting started in bitcoin.com is a great resource about learning the basics of Bitcoin and how to use it. Then there is, of course, the developer.bitcoin.com, which explains how to write code for Bitcoin, how to quickly start an application. The last three are my links. My blog, my Facebook group, bitcoinsofia, and my YouTube channel, which are also these three, no, actually YouTube channel, Facebook group, and the link for this meetup. So if anybody is watching this at home, they can register on the meetup and see the next events. So I should now check the Slido, and anyone is welcome to ask questions. I think I closed it. Any questions? Go ahead. Yes? Yes?
It sounds like something positive, like free money.
No.
Isn't it? Why?
Forking of value is when some people forking of value is when the chain split survives. It can be positive for the people who wanted to split, but at the same time for the people who are on the other chain, it is negative because some of the money from their chain is taken away. So it's usually not positive.
Okay, but if you have 5 Bitcoin and it forks, you have double 5s.
Yes, but both are worth less.
Both are
Both of them.
less.
Yes. No, not worthless as one word. Worth less. Basically, actually, so far that hasn't happened. So far, it's been the opposite. But that's only because the markets are a bit crazy. So far, every time we had a split, people got separate coins, but the value did not drop. What's normal to happen is when there is a split, the value in dollars of both chains to fall down. Because you did not print more dollars, you just split the numbers and the dollars. No. So far it has been done with hard forks only. Soft fork split is possible, but harder to achieve. The point is, so far it's been free money, but that's an exception. The rule is that it's not free money when there is a split. Yes?
Few days ago, Bitcoin Cash miners met in Bangkok, Thailand to discuss something.
Yes, I actually promised to talk about the November hard fork, and I forgot about it. I'll talk about that now. So currently there are 2 big miner groups, which both of them are connected to developer groups. Some people like to say that this is a fight between the developers. I believe it's a fight between the miners. One miner group is Bitmain, which is funding the Bitcoin ABC team. The other group is CoinGeek, which are funding their own developers and are mostly represented by Craig Wright. No, Roger Ver is not part of nChain. Roger Ver is just a businessman who runs bitcoin.com and some services. He has a few miners, but overall his mining percentage is pretty low. He's more focused on services. CoinGeek is the biggest miner in Bitcoin Cash. They hold about, I think, 29% of the current hash rate. On the other side, we have Bitmain, and I have no idea how much they hold. I know it's less, 19. But another thing to mention is that they don't really hold these percentages. Their normal job is to sell machines. And the users that buy these machines simply join a pool of miners, and depending on which pool they're using, they're mining for different stuff. And it's possible to run a different software on that miner. So just because they have 19% doesn't mean they actually have them. Now, that doesn't mean that CoinGeek is going to win this quarrel, but at the same time, it makes it more likely. There is actually a third side in this quarrel, which is Cobra Bitcoin. Have you heard of him? Yeah, he's the owner of bitcoin.org. He is very active on social media online, but at the same time, he's anonymous, or at least we don't know who it is. Google knows. It does. It knows everything. But he's proposing user-activated no fork, which basically means he's going to add replay protection so that he does a hard fork, which is required by the current implementation. But at the same time, no new changes would be added. He claims to have secured 25% of the hash rate and an exchange which will hold the BCH ticker for him. These are claims not verified yet, but I believe that if he does that, he's just making it easier for CrackWright. For CrackWright to achieve his thing. Basically, CrackWright intends to have a mining war. Mining war means that after the chains split, he's gonna do attacks on the smaller chains if his chain is bigger. Attacks as in 51% attacks. The idea is not that the software would somehow be compatible with everything and they'll be forced to have a chain with him. No, he cannot do that. However, if he has enough mining power, he can attack the smaller chains and until he kills them. And once he does that, it is possible to simply keep the BCH ticker for himself. To do that, he would normally need 67% of the mining power. And as said, CoinGeek only has 29 currently. However, people speculate that he might have mining machines in the BTC chain, and he can flip them. I do not know if that's true. I have no idea what's going to happen. Basically, if he doesn't have enough mining power, we're going to have a chain split. If he has enough mining power, then right after the chain split, he's going to kill off the small miners. And we shall see. What happened in the Bangkok meeting was that people gathered, mostly people from Bitmain and ABC, and Bitcoin Unlimited as well, but Bitcoin Unlimited is quite neutral in this conflict. They gathered, they were going to discuss stuff. Craig was invited, however he left after the first day. He made a short interview on the hallway of the meeting and then left. Basically, he only stayed there for half an hour. My guess is that he didn't hear what he wanted to hear, so he left. I don't know what's going to happen after that, but I'm expecting turbulent times. Any other questions? I'm going to check the Slido in case somebody left a comment. Yes? Yes.
Is it possible for users to make a change if miners don't agree?
Yes, completely possible. The question is not is it possible to make it, it's permissionless. You can make any change, even you as a home user can make any change and run a different node. The better question is it gonna survive? And if it's a hard fork, if it introduces features that do not exist, then yes, it will survive. because nothing is stopping it. It's future compatible. It's not restricting, it's adding stuff. However, you probably won't make any change either. If it's a soft fork, then it has to be by a big company, a big organization, or a big group of organizations. Imagine if all the exchanges made a consensus between them, but only 10% of the miners agreed. They can do the fork. And that would be a user-activated fork. However, they would have to add some protection against mining attacks, because the other 90% of the miners would still be against that. Yes?
Some cryptocurrencies intend to implement proof of stake instead of proof of work, which again will be implemented with some kind of fork. How do you think? What do you think? How it will affect the fork process, and what will happen with POS in the future?
If you're talking about Ethereum moving from proof of work to proof of stake, then miners would fight it for as long as they can. However, Ethereum is a highly centralized network, centralized around the developers, around Vitalik, which means that he's the one who decides. That's what makes Bitcoin different, and some others as well. In them, it is the miners who have the final word. Users can change, users can move their value over, and that can influence the miners, but at the end the miners have the final word. Ethereum is not like that. I like to think of Ethereum not so much as a cryptocurrency and more as an open source foundation. For example, you have the Linux Foundation, which of course the comparison is not really valid because the Linux Foundation does a lot more serious software. But I like to compare them to Ethereum because Ethereum at the end provides a platform for software, not so much a currency. And in that sense, it forks in a different way. Does that answer the question?
Well, it's not only Ethereum. There are many others. For instance, some of the Chinese projects, they have something like proof of stake already implemented.
If they started as a proof of stake, then there is no such fight against the proof of stake. If you're asking what I think about proof of stake in general, I do not like it. The reason is quite simple. Once people stake their money in proof of stake, they have no incentive to help the network. They have no incentive to relay transactions, to do anything other than get more coins. For example, in EOS, you have how many were they? 21? I think in EOS there were 21 block producers. That's the word. I was going to say miners. So these 21 block producers can produce blocks, but other than producing blocks, they don't really have any incentive to give you that data. They don't have any incentive to build big data servers like Google has big data servers, something that can actually scale as much as EOS promises. Of course, they can be changed with their governance system, but if nobody else is offering these big data servers, then they're not going to happen. We have to see. Maybe there will be enough competition that actually the block producers have to provide the services as well. But in most cases of proof of stake, especially if it's not delegated proof of stake but actual normal proof of stake, the producers don't have any incentive to help the network after they stake. After they stake, they just leave the coins, print money, and fill their pockets. Again, I'm not sure if I answered your question correctly. I just said what I think about proof of stake.
How about Lightning Network? Is it a fork as well?
No, it's not a fork. It's a second layer solution. It uses some cool tricks, but it introduces some nasty vulnerabilities that have to be considered a lot. And if it works, it will be big. However, there are way too many reasons that it won't work. Anything else? Mostly because I believe. Okay, so
One day in 2017, Bitcoin Cash forked out from Bitcoin, and you decided to move to Bitcoin.
no, actually, I moved much later after studying a lot. Actually, okay, here is an interesting story. The days after it moved, I actually bought a few Bitcoin Cashes while they were dirt cheap. And I was stupid enough to sell them at a loss. Because right after that, the network was really slow. And I still didn't know what the fuck that Bitcoin Cash thing is. So I lost money. But back to the point. After studying a lot, I became a Bitcoin fan. Not Bitcoin Cash in general, just the fan of the initial design. And I'm a fan of zero conf transactions. I believe they can work in a great way. I'm a fan of the blockchain concept in general, and I am disappointed that the Bitcoin. I'm not gonna call it Bitcoin Core. The Bitcoin network is not using Bitcoin as much as it should. Basically, they are working on something that is not Bitcoin, when the revolution is called the Bitcoin revolution. Lightning Network, as good as it could be if it's done properly, is not Bitcoin, and does not have the same properties. And these are the properties that we actually need. So as a fan of Bitcoin, I'm obviously the fan of the chain that believes Bitcoin should be the thing we use and not something on top of it. Does that answer the question?
No. Sorry. There are lots of problems in Bitcoin which have to be solved. For instance, there is no way to put a note next to a transaction so that the other side knows what are you paying for, etc. Which is we don't.
You mean to add text to a transaction?
Yes, exactly.
That is possible.
Currently not.
It is?
Okay. So we can.
It is. The thing is, there are standard transactions and non-standard transactions. Something that most non-programmers don't know is that Bitcoin is not about numbers in addresses. The numbers in addresses are abstractions above the basic protocol. The basic protocols only knows about inputs, outputs, and script. And script is a programming language. It allows you to write a lot of stuff, including return outputs. And the return outputs are exactly what allows you to write text to a transaction. So yes, it is possible. It's just that the wallets have not implemented it yet. But it doesn't require a protocol change. Yes, yeah, go ahead.
Now we're talking about the tokenization of things.
Yes.
Right, and these ideas. And I wanted to ask you about your opinion or about your prediction about the Bitcoin Cash chain to be able to be tokenized.
First, the thing that I want to say is that this was possible for a few years now. It is not something new. Wormhole Cash is new. It's a new project that's a second layer solution that involves tokens, but also smart contracts in general. However, tokens were possible for a long time. There were multiple projects, one of which is counterparties, what was the word? Cohort coins. This was actually a project that was done on the BTC Bitcoin. And it was introduced before Bitcoin Cash existed. And as a response, the core team cut the maximum amount of return characters. I just spoke about the op return opcode. It used to return 80 characters, which were just any text. And this text can be used for just a random message, but it can also be used for something valuable like hashes or GUIDs or any information that can be used to mark transaction as this or that. Basically, you could build second layer protocols with op return. So the core developers didn't like that. They considered it spam. They wanted to focus on the core function, which is having coins, bitcoins, and didn't want anything else. So they reduced the amount of size to 40 bytes, which made impossible any second layer solutions of that type. On 15th of May, Bitcoin Cash moved that size again from 40 to 220 bytes, which basically means, hey developers, come aboard. And that's why core coins are now possible on Bitcoin Cash and not on Bitcoin Core. However, the new solution, Wormhole Cash, is just a competitor of that idea. It works in a different way. It involves some burning of Bitcoin Cash tokens, Bitcoin Cash coins. But some people speculate that this is very bad for the Bitcoin network. I don't have an opinion yet. I believe that people are free to do whatever they want with their coins. And I also believe that any second layer solution is permissionless by default. People can do whatever they want as long as it's by the protocol rules. And Wormhole Cash follows the rules of the protocol, therefore it's allowed. What its effects are gonna be financially, I have no idea. I'm not a trader and I don't understand this stuff. Is that a proper answer?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else? Nobody asked any questions in the Slido. Okay, go ahead. It is possible to mine it even with a Raspberry Pi, but you're not gonna get any good results. Nowadays, people use very, very strong machines. Yes, and anything less than that is not gonna give you any results in the near millennia. Actually, even ASICs nowadays are not smart. If you by ASIC farms, some big companies buy a few thousands of ASICs, put them in a big space, do proper ventilation, and have contracts with the local electricity providers to get cheap electricity. Sometimes they even steal the electricity. Yes?
I'm just curious, would there be a way to mine without just creating heat to do something useful in Ireland?
Well, I need you to rephrase that.
When we mine, we're just using computer power
Yes?
in a way for nothing.
Yes?
Would there be a way to have algorithms that have a purpose?
Yes. In fact, right now, in this today, and it started 7 o'clock, and it's probably already ended, there was a meeting about exactly that topic. I couldn't attend, obviously, because I'm here, but it's about artificial intelligence and blockchain. However, what they're doing, in fact, is not artificial intelligence and blockchain, because it's not about giving money to people. What they're doing is training programs, and these programs can be all kind of programs, but anything that can be validated as work being done can be used as proof of work. And they're simply rewarding people for doing their job. Training machine learning algorithms or simulating was it DNA, or I think it was unfolding of some biological stuff that I forgot the word for. The point is, it is possible, but not for Bitcoin and not for any currency. It's possible to give numbers to people and then hope that somebody else is going to buy this number. However, it is not as a fair type of mining, because it's not optimized to be fair. It's optimized to do proper good for the people work. One more thing to mention is that this heat and lost electricity are not wasted. They provide the security of the chain, which means that they actually do positive work. Of course, as long as we have only 2 or 3 transactions per second, it is wasted. Right now, the security that Bitcoin Cash gets for these few transactions a day that we do is mostly a waste. If we scale enough, it's not going to be so much a waste. I saw a hand there. Or did I? Okay, I didn't see a hand. Anything else? I guess that's it then. Thank you for coming here. Yeah, exactly that. And that's it. That's the presentation.